I'm the head of creative at DixonBaxi. We're a studio now of about 50. I actually joined back in 2012 off the back of working on the Olympic Games project in London in that heady summer when everything felt really great and optimistic and positive. Jumped into working at DixonBaxi initially as a kind of freelance creative director, and I never left. And it's been a sort of a wonderful journey, sort of going from a smaller team kind of crammed in a tiny little studio in Shoreditch to where we are now with our own home that we own in Hoxton. Lovely kind of beautifully decked out space, which is super conducive for everything from hanging out to working hard and sort of bringing clients in on the journey for the kind of processes that we make. I think what I want to do is just very, very briefly kind of give you a little insight into what drives us as a creative studio. And hopefully you guys out there know a bit about us already. And if you don't, there's tons of kind of cool material that you can look at. Our website's obviously kind of rich with case studies. And of course, Simon and the Porver did a kind of sort of video kind of film series called Be Brave, which just will give you kind of tons of insight. So I really recommend watching those. So kind of just a couple of things really. First of all, you know, some kind of little mini mantras, I suppose, that we stand by in the studio. First one about being, you know, designed for life. It's very sort of a statement I hope, you know, a lot of us on this call share. We should all know what this means. I think I'd be right in saying that we're not here kind of to push papers around in an office from 9 to 5. It's something that sort of seeps deeper into our bones as a passion. And I think it's got to be that, you know, it's got to be a passion and a love first and foremost. And, you know, there's a certain part of you that should go into every project that you make. You are not designing for you, but, you know, sure as hell should bring a bit of your own personality into the mix and your spirit and energy. You know, we like to kind of think about designing for everybody out there. You know, there's this kind of idea of democratized design. The brands that we create, we want to be shareable. We want people to have a buzz and an excitement around them. So, you know, thinking about those people who are those kind of end users of our brands, you know, people who impact, you know, who get impacted by them every day, are forefront of our mind all the time. And the idea of kind of being able to make a difference to the people out there is important. You know, thinking beyond our Hoxton bubble is really important. You know, it takes a certain amount of energy and skill and kind of commitment to try and place yourself as a creative in the minds of your client, but also the people who are ultimately going to be kind of inspired by, you know, the brands that you're creating. We love designing at scale, and that's sort of two things. You know, big brands that reach millions or even billions of eyeballs. I think maybe the Premier League project we did may have our biggest eyeball count, because that was like a full global kind of brand experience, which rolled out everywhere pretty much. But it also means, you know, about 360-degree brand experiences, which sounds like a whole load of bullshit jargon, but this sort of thought of it, you know, beyond a logo and an identity, you know, scale is where people touch it, where people interact with it, those kind of moments where they get to kind of be inspired or influenced by the brands you create. So scale isn't necessarily about the big fuck off billboard, or, you know, working with someone like ITV. You know, it's a client we've got in the room right now. They're big. They're kind of, you know, one of the nation's biggest brands, but you can have scale with smaller clients and you know, get the satisfaction from that as well. And then ultimately, you know, this idea of, you know, not compromising, you know, doing it without mediocrity. Absolutely kind of can see that in the Orca work as well. You know, challenging the client is what we want to do. We want to push, we need to move forwards. We are not about sitting on our laurels. And it's a selfish thing a little bit as well, I think. You know, we do it for the thrill. We do it because we want to be a bit cool. But you can't do it at the expense of the client and their audience. But I think it has to have range, expression, and a spirit. So, you know, making sure what you do has that imbued throughout is important. So kind of the idea that we always kind of emerge with at the beginning is about starting uncomfortable. It's a simple statement, really. You know, we don't like to kind of build up to a big reveal. You know, we're not on a little step-by-step journey that kind of slowly but surely convinces a client. We come out with a bang, and we want to make them feel a bit challenged. You know, we want them to question. You know, we have to kind of be confident about why they have come to us. It's the same as what the guys at Orca were saying. You know, there's a reason they've come to us rather than XYZ other agencies. You know, they know what we do. They know we're successful. So we have got some permission when they walk through our door to challenge and test them. And we kind of show them this scale, actually. It's something that is, maybe you guys have seen this one before, I'm not sure, but the idea of kind of starting at the top end of the scale and working back is a big part of the process. It's unlikely that you'll then be pushed beyond that uncomfortable, and it's very likely that you'll be compromising along the journey to come back to a sort of a point of equilibrium. But you know, we show this to our clients. We show them this chart. We tell them this is what's going to happen. And another thing that we share, I think, is, you know, this idea of collaboration with the client. You know, it's very, very important. We're not a kind of dictatorial studio. Our clients know their audience better than us, and we are here to challenge those conventions, but also work with them for the right solution. So, you know, knowing that there is a kind of compromise to be met, it's like haggling at a market in like Marrakesh. You know, they start high, you go really low, and you know there's going to be a sweet spot in the middle that everyone kind of walks away really happy. So it's a little bit like that. It's a bit of sort of creative negotiation, I suppose. So I'm going to have to really bang through these, I think. I don't know whether you guys know, but my colleague Tasha was due to give this talk today, and she's sadly got laryngitis and actually can't speak. So I've kind of I've pulled together this deck with her help, and it's quite long, but I'm going to kind of rattle through as best I can. I wanted to use EUROSPORT as a kind of good vehicle just to sort of explain our creative process a little bit. Just contextually, EUROSPORT, whether you've heard of it, I don't know. It's a brand that's been around over 30 years, and it was probably one of the first kind of sports-specific kind of satellite channels back in the day when BSB and Sky kind of were emerging. It's very big in Europe. It's not so big in the UK, but it is very big out there. Poland, France, Germany, etc., the Nordics especially. And it's a real hub for kind of some kind of premium sports, I suppose. So tennis is very big there. They've got a lot of the World Tour, and a lot of the Grand Slams play out on EUROSPORT. All the big cycling competitions and races and Grand Tours and sort of events are played out on EUROSPORT. They do have the Olympic Games license through Discovery. There's a lot of athletics, there's a lot of motorsport, and they're really big with winter sports as well. So it's kind of it is a go-to destination for a lot of people. The project itself is built on this relationship that we've got with them, that we've had over the years. It's a collaborative thing that we've worked on over time, and we started back in 2014. The project came out in 2015, but we originally rebranded them you know, back then in 2015, and that's quite an interesting story in itself. You know, that rebrand, and then to in 2021 to rebrand our own work is quite an unusual and interesting process to go through. But you'll kind of see why we had to do it. So lots of really cool projects. I'll bounce through them very quickly. Originally, we had the big rebrand. We devised this very simple framework that gave us space to create very diverse and fan-centric sport experiences as the kind of projects developed over time. So the original rebrand was based around this idea of a dashboard of kind of information to communicate what, when, and where. And it held at its core this idea of the peak moment. So the idea of getting you right into the heart of the moments that matter in any sporting experience. And that's not necessarily about crossing the finish line first. It might be about, breaking serve and coming back from a defeat. So a really kind of simple framework. And actually we collaborated with Pentagram on the kind of identity for this project. But, as a sort of, a studio with motion design at its heart, we were kind of involved with all the kind of visual motion assets, the filming, the kind of animated frameworks and things like that. Then another major project we did with them was kind of taking their kind of the rights of the Olympic Games that they purchased, and we created this very kind of holistic system around the podium. So it's a really great example of how an identity can then explode into a wealth of expression. And all these, I think most of these case studies are on our website, so you can just dig into them if you want to sort of in-depth kind of look at them. Then you can see the journey is kind of really amplifying and getting quite exciting. We had the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang in 2018, and it's held in South Korea, of course. So it's all about K-pop in the games, and that really allowed us to sort of have a lot of fun shooting in like blackened studios with UV paint and ultraviolet lights, and kind of just making a music video, confounding expectations of what winter sports should be like. Everyone else is doing white, clean snow, and we're just like, fuck that. It's neon and it's a rave. And it's more fun. A little micro project that's really dear to my heart is the home of cycling, and this is where we kind of got under the skin of the grit and the grunge and the kind of pure, like, ridiculous effort it takes to kind of win or perform in a grand tour, and a whole kind of vast bespoke toolkit just for cycling on Eurosport. And then, at the end of our kind of arc, we developed a much kind of cleaner, more sophisticated sort of brand system for all the tennis content. So really sort of pairing it right back to, beautiful, rich, sophisticated colors, and just kind of working with elegant typographic animation that kind of responded to the way people move on a tennis court, for instance. So I think, it's suffice to say we kind of blew it up along the way. We kind of went pretty bonkers. And, it was about creating very fan-centric, bespoke experiences for each kind of individual sport and discipline. Eurosport wanted to kind of prove to their audience that they kind of lived and breathed the fans the sports that their fans love too. And you can see it created quite a kind of world of kind of sort of sub-brands and a lot of kind of visual noise, actually, which, pretty difficult to manage after a while. And, there came a point where they needed to kind of, actually kind of connect better with their fans and serve them better from a technological perspective as well. So the kind of out of the old kind of project was born of them kind of creating a new direct-to-consumer platform. So direct-to-consumer being like a Netflix or Prime Video or whatever, a place to go to that is a kind of bespoke portal directly for that brand. So there was going to be a Eurosport app or player that you could just go straight into without the need for signing up to Sky or any of those things. And actually, what came with it was an opportunity to reset. Eurosport is run locally right across Europe. I probably like 19 territories, maybe more. I mean, at least 20 different languages, I think. You know, each country you can imagine has a different passion for a different type of sport. What they love in the Nordics is very different to what they love in Spain. And each of those territories also have their own heroes. So, you know, all the campaigns for like the Grand Tours or the tennis have to have the ability to highlight and celebrate different athletes. So there was a big need to kind of simplify the kind of whole brand toolkit. So it's very versatile, really easy to use across Europe. So the project is, you know, the actual case study itself is on our website, and it's very succinct and easy to follow. But I wanted to just kind of give you a bit of a dive into how we got to that solution for the latest rebrand along that journey. So we had a challenge for this rebrand. You know, it was a challenge to unlock the power of sport, and the client kind of came to us with this kind of mantra and this challenge, and we had to sort of try and understand what that meant, really. It was about trying to get at, you know, fans close to the action. It's about giving them the power to understand what's happening at any given moment. It's the kind of need to create fans, I suppose, as well, and make, you know, encourage people to fall in love with sport and the diversity of sport as well. So a big part of the kind of new Eurosport mission was about kind of celebrating diversity, you know, breaking down the kind of shackles and barriers of the kind of old male-dominated, white male-dominated kind of sport. So it's a kind of a bigger underlying mission in the business. The idea of, you know, their personality and who they are, you know, being very gritty, you know, down to earth, authentic. They're packed full of ex-professionals giving their opinion on sport. They wanted it to be unfiltered and bold, so really kind of, you know, honest, passionate, and really kind of celebrate what sport stands for. A very unusual part of this project was that there was an identity that had already been created for this product. So actually, it's an unusual project for us, and it's not something we often take on, but there is this kind of this design system that was actually developed by RGA as they were sort of developing the product, and they, you know, really kind of optimized it for streaming, for digital marketing, and, you know, they've created this kind of system here which is simple, easy to understand, hasn't got many moving parts, a raw typeface, which is the paintbrush, this very simple Ionic kind of standard kind of looking font, I suppose, this kind of frame device, really kind of engaging photography. So it's quite a simple kit of parts. And it's kind of, you know, it was unified and simplified. It was very clean and simple, but really, you know, we have a bigger challenge when we're designing for TV and beyond TV. You know, you can't really do everything with such a small kit. And we had to sort of try to understand how we could bring this identity to what is a complex linear airspace. And that might sound like jargon, but what it means is, like, when you watch TV, there's tons of different things that have to happen before or after you get to the show, whether it's advertising, whether it's sponsorship, whether it's a title sequence, or an ident. All these sort of things have to be kind of choreographed. And then inside the shows, you know, there's heaps of graphics and tables and charts and tools for analysis, all that stuff, you know, a ton of things. So the brand that, you know, was created was not fit for purpose. It was simple and it worked for the single thing it was designed for, but not the challenge that we were sort of set. So we had to turn kind of this system, two typefaces, a frame device, very, you know, unstaged photography, which is really nice, you know, really kind of in the moment action, but it's very, very stripped back. So we had to kind of, you know, blow it up ourselves, I suppose. And this is the kind of go wide stage that we were talking about before, you know, really sort of going sort of expansive. And, you know, it's unusual that we kind of had a visual kind of hook that we had to kind of anchor back to every time, but we wanted to sort of understand, you know, it's about testing the client's kind of sort of appetite, I suppose, and how far they want to go. So, you know, we were looking to develop and understand what the brand that they had created meant for them and what we could do with it and how far we could take it and what those kind of brushstrokes meant and, you know, how far we were able to take them and turn them into different things. And so this is a kind of non-client facing exercise, but, you know, conducted in lockdown. So conveniently, all these elements are screen grabbable off Mural for you to see. And you see that, you know, this is a mixture of kind of inspiration and design and kind of trying to sort of unpick what, you know, the ingredients we've been given are and how far we can take them and what we can do with them. And we start to sort of think about, you know, the opportunities that kind of present themselves and how we can develop and expand on the visual language. And Tasha and Dan, who were the kind of creative leads on the project, had a real challenge, I think, in terms of trying to smash open what was quite a tight kind of visual system. And we wanted to try and give it purpose and direction. So two themes kind of emerged, and one of them was about the kind of sport as an art form, and how can we explore that? What does it mean? It's like that kind of raw expression of kind of artistic kind of aptitude and message, you know, on the court. But it's also, you know, about what's going on inside the mind of the athlete and the psychology and the kind of the inner monologues and narratives that are running. And those kind of two ideas started to give us something to think about and kind of work on. And we started to kind of think about how the kind of simple kind of frame device that the D2C brand had could actually become a canvas for the expression, and how it could become a broader kind of world to explore, to play out different scenarios and take us closer to the mind of the athlete and, you know, understand it better and be inspired and engaged by it. So we were really sort of, you know, trying to unlock the power of sport ourselves and understand what that meant to our client and to their fans. And like part of that is sort of, you know, we talk about getting into the mind of our audience and understanding what their needs are, but also, you know, we got to sort of think about our content as well. And in this case, you know, Tasha and Dan did this really kind of deep dive into the athlete's mindset and what plays out internally, I suppose, as they're performing and as they're competing. So, you know, thinking about, you know, what drives an athlete, you know, what is it, the power of their dreams and, you know, their kind of ambition to succeed? Are there kind of, you know, rituals that they undertake that allow them to kind of focus at any given moment in a game? You know, what are they sacrificing? What else have they given up in order to sort of get up at 4 a.m. and pound the streets in the pissing rain? You know, it's those sorts of things that we had to start kind of really tuning our mind into. And, you know, getting away from the screen, getting away from the laptop or the kind of the Wacom tablet, whatever, getting in, you know, paper and pen and scrawling shit down and painting and being very physical was a big part of the kind of creative journey the guys went on. Tasha really kind of got into the idea of kind of focusing on specific athletes, Dina Asher-Smith, understanding her story, what was driving her. And you can see how we're starting to create kind of athlete portraits even to sort of unpick, you know, the ideas that drive them. And this really started to create an absolute mountain of fuel, too much, really. And then there was that kind of thing that the guys at Orca were saying again, you know, that sort of moment when they were talking about the kind of naming exercise when you have like 1,000 ideas on the wall. You've got to stop and start killing stuff. And yeah, it's probably at that point when you do say some ideas are a bit pony, because you've got to, and you've got to kill stuff you love as well, because there comes a point when, I mean, no client is going to take, you know, this as a brand, are they? It's like, it's mayhem. So we had to sort of start thinking, okay, what really works? What's actually going to kind of define a system? What is going to be a fundamental kind of framework? And where are the areas that we can be expressive and kind of talk directly to the fan about something that's happening, rather than navigating them somewhere. This is actually a little screen grab of a kind of mural session we did with the client So this is one of our kind of live mood boards that we've done, where we're sort of gauging appetite, a bit like the guys were saying before. So lots of green dots, lots of red dots, you know, what they like, what they hate. We find what they hate is just as important as what they like. In fact, it's probably even more insightful, you know, gives you very clear guidance. We actually had a really big challenge with this project as well, is that, you know, our legacy client who'd been with us on the journey was a really kind of, you know, he'd been at EUROSPORT like 20 years and like actually a relentless creative, amazing guy who, you know, was passionate about connecting with fans. And it was coupled with a kind of newer client who'd come through Discovery, who is sort of, you know, leading the marketing side, who wanted this kind of cleaner, crisper, simpler system. So we had this incredible tension between, you know, this kind of anchor point of the kind of direct consumer brand that had already been created, and the need for, you know, that we knew that, you know, the end client and the end audience needed that kind of connection and spirit. It couldn't just be a sort of bland generic system. So on this journey, you know, we started, you know, actually this was a studio session. We got in there a few times and put everything on the wall and started to sort of work out what the rules are, you know, how can we start to sort of use this kind of canvas as a kind of system for sort of multi-dimensional storytelling. This kind of idea of a connected experience across the brand, where you can move through discipline, but also in and out of stories at depth. So you might kind of contrast moments within a game or an event. You might kind of draw parallels between different sporting disciplines. So, you know, showing the power of kind of commitment to training from snooker to cycling, for instance. Or it might be about showing journey and context. So the ability to start to use these kind of multiple screens. You can kind of see on the kind of middle right there, you can kind of contextualize a moment and show a backstory and show, you know, the journey that an athlete's maybe come on. And it started to create a really kind of rich and interesting experience. So, you know, another little thing, you kind of, this idea of the kind of raw, this defiant voice, you can see the bottom left was this idea of kind of having the sort of the power to sort of overwrite or kind of scratch out or kind of remodel thinking and ideas, and the idea of kind of overcoming the odds. And we created this typeface as a fully animated kind of type kit as well. So it's all, you know, type whatever you want in and it draws itself on really beautifully. It's very, very cool. So just kind of taking all those ideas, we then had to sort of work out where it all goes. So this is a little schematic of what we call a junction. So a junction is when you go from one piece of content on TV to another piece of content whilst you're watching. So, you know, a show, part one, you go into the commercial break, you see some promos, you see some branding to tell you where you are, and then you kind of back into the show again, and you're seeing kind of all the graphic content and things like that. So we started to sort of, you know, we had a framework, you know, places where all these kind of ideas could start to live. And you can start to see here where we're starting to choreograph elements, and bottom left is quite a good example actually of still quite expressive, but starting to think about how we might create a, you know, 30-40 second promo, you know, moving through different types of content, allowing kind of moments to be augmented with commentary, but still ultimately getting you to the kind of the content and when and where to watch it. And there's a little tip here as well, as something we love to do is like, you know, okay, we are designing for a TV frame. We are ultimately putting it in a 16:9 box, but it's not really the way to kind of approach this stuff. We find is to just like forget about the format, design something that feels good as a composition, an idea with the right tension and pace across it. And then you can work out how to take that energy and bring it to something more conventional. Because the kind of 16:9 TV frame is a, you know, it's a blessing and a curse. It's like nice and consistent. It never really changes, but it's also what every other person is trying to design into. So breaking out of that convention there is a really kind of liberating way to sort of think about things. So kind of on that journey, you know, you can see we went from absolute kind of, you know, mayhem and we started to refine and give kind of rules and and purpose to all these individual ideas. And a big thing that we kept coming back to, and it's really important, I think, for all branding projects, is the brand isn't the fucking hero, right? It's the message or the content which is important. You have to sort of shake that desire to, you know, put your creativity at the forefront. It's like it is a framework for other things quite often. So, you know, you go on that journey and you kind of, you're really excited about all the amazing things you're creating, but at the ultimately you can't smother the content, and you can't detract from actually why people are tuning in. They want to see Pogacar win a time trial. They don't want to see your beautifully animated paint splatting all over the place. So you know, it's a reality to it. So this is just a couple of frames from the final kind of design, and you can see how it's pared back, simplified. It's still got the expression in there at the right moments. It's clean and clear, and navigation is really paramount. It goes from promos into the system, the kind of the kind of assets that you need as a fan to understand what is happening within sport at any given moment, whether it's, you know, punditry and commentary without missing a moment of the game that's playing out, that's happening on the left. That's kind of what we call a 50-50 or 70-30 sort of screen. You have a table, obviously, a sort of leaderboard. And then on the right, you know, one of the things we love doing is really, really cool kind of responsive score clocks and things like that. So always good to have a little play with those. And then, you know, it boils down to like the simplest things, these little like pop-up windows and things, but it's still that you can still, you know, you've got all that material, all that inspiration that you've invented. You can bring that energy even into the tiniest, smallest detail of how something animates or resolves. So this is a kind of little kind of screen grab overview. And I think what it does is it says that you may have all that kind of wealth of kind of material. If you find the right place to put it, it can still exist, especially when you've got 24-hour kind of TV stations to fill. The right time in the right place can create that kind of same energy as kind of one frame that may have all this energy contained within it. It's about the kind of art of kind of deploying it in the right place and, you know, communicating that energy. So, Chris, I've got a kind of little clip which sort of shows it all in action. It's about 2 minutes long.
Yeah, go for it, Dan.
On it. Hopefully it plays out okay. I'm not sure if I've optimized for video or not, so let's just see. Here we go, and then see what time we've got for questions. Can we hear that?